2 is a Type 3 design modification by Norwest Investments LLC. The applicant is requesting to reduce the number of boulevard trees required based on Section 63.265, Subdivision 5C, to be planted in the proposed Northwest Commercial Center development. The applicant reasoning is to address safety and visibility with the retail portion of the site. The applicant just walked in a few minutes ago. He would like to speak. I need consensus from the council.
I would just point out that if we're going to change the rules as we go along, I've asked for a public hearing on this, so the public has a right to speak on this as well. And my expectation is before we take any action to weaken anything or reduce the standards, that the public would have an announced time to do this as well. We've had plenty of opportunities up to this point. We have not allowed the public to speak on this, so I'm fine with allowing the gentleman to speak tonight, but I expect the public to have input before we take any actions weakening this tree ordinance.
All right. What do you think? Give us what you'd like to see as an outcome, I guess.
Well, what I'd like to see as an outcome right now is what we've submitted, because then we know for sure what we can present, what I could sell. I believe that if we would look throughout the country and talk to people that do retail malls in higher traffic areas, I'm not talking about urban downtown malls where you can walk. I mean, this is a suburban high speed. I shouldn't say it's high speed, but I think people are traveling 55 miles an hour out there. We need to have the ability to, for certain, not have boulevard trees along West Circle Drive or your main artery corridors. What that would do is certainly eliminate the ability for anybody's building sign or signs to go away, because if you look at, imagine yourself driving down West Circle Drive and mature canopy trees there are there in the boulevard. You're not looking at them at 90 degrees, but you're looking at them at an angle. You'll see a solid wall. In order to look in as you're driving down, you'll have to look in sideways. And it's kind of like the timing light when you used to do the timing on your car. So flash, 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 flash. And because of that, as people look at that, they'll, that is a difficulty, that is an issue. I do believe, though, in reading the ordinance, that the ordinance does allow for other things to be taken into consideration other than the 4. If you read the actual words, it says these 4 items shall be considered. Now, when you look at that, they shall be considered because certainly everybody understands they're concrete issues. But I can't imagine that the ordinance was written in such a way that it would prohibit any other issues that may come up in the future from being considered. And when you look at it, everybody looks at an ordinance with a bias. I want to look at an ordinance with a bias. I want to be really strict and not allow anything, or I want to look at an ordinance with a bias that I want to allow everything. And so since everybody comes to something with a bias, it's really not a question of whether you're biased. The question is, if you're biased, which is the best bias to be biased by?
Mr. Atkins, Mr. Wheeler, I'm not exactly agreeing with this interpretation. What's your legal interpretation of this?
The 4 criteria are the only ones that can be considered.
Thank you for that clarification.
Unless there's a design modification, correct?
This is the design modification criteria.
And as I understand, we're in a quasi-judicial nature, so we would not be able to, without changing the ordinance, go beyond the scope of those 4.
Well, again, the ordinance says for a design modification, the following criteria shall be considered. That's all you can consider.
That was my interpretation as well.
I'm not an attorney, but I do read a lot of documents. And if when this was written, the word only was put in, it would be extremely clear.
I'm going to go with my city attorney on this one.
Okay.
One of my principal concerns, and you can comment on this, is there's 3 major planned or existing pedestrian and bicyclist pathways through this region. One is along West Circle Drive. A second one is planned for 19th going to the west. A third one is our major multimodal corridor running along the former DM Spur Trail. Basically, the proposed compromise that you've drawn up changes this from a fully shaded pedestrian corridor to absolutely 0 trees along both of those routes. Is that what we should be doing for pedestrian routes in our city?
Sometimes you have to walk in the sun. I mean, there's lots of places where you're in the sunshine. When you ride a bicycle, there's lots of places when you're in sunshine.
I just butt in too, because I've been very outspoken on this, but I think Quick Trip as a company, as an employer in the town, has done a pretty responsible job, and I acknowledge that as well. And this is more about the environmental aspects.
Giving us the flexibility to create vision is the key.
Is there anything that we could do as far as a condition or whatever so that they could not only begin the project, but feel comfortable knowing that the council was going to give him a fair hearing on, I don't think he objects to the number of trees at all, from what I'm hearing. The number of trees is not an issue, correct?
No, as long as we,
Just the
as long as we can have the
location.
visibility. Now, I don't know where we, can get the number and keep them all in the boulevard, though.
President Hanson, I would emphasize again that I expect that the public should have an opportunity to weigh in if we're going to give away the shading of our major pedestrian trails, and I don't see that as a compromise. I don't see that as viable. We've had plenty of opportunity to open this up for public input. There's been a conscious decision made not to do that to this point, and I think the public deserves the right to weigh in.
Bilderbeck?
Well, then I think what we need to do is to table this until the plans are reviewed by our building group, Public Works. You said they've been turned in.
Well,
And we can see that, and then there's also the bid on July 8th where they're going to be meeting with the county to talk about where the tree placement along they could go along
Yeah.
major areas.
I do know,
So-
I hate, didn't mean to cut you off, but I do know absolutely for a fact if we put trees along West Circle Drive, that would kill our project.
Now, let me ask this,
Okay.
because the city council's received peer-reviewed scientific studies that have indicated a relationship between boulevard, street trees, and retail activity. When we have never, you're making this case that retail's not viable there, but we've never seen any sort of, scientific peer-reviewed study that would indicate that this is the case, is that data exists.
Yeah, right here, we wouldn't spend the money, and that's 100%. We wouldn't spend the money because in our experience and our beliefs, being retailers, we know we wouldn't spend the money. And so that's what we'd go on.
So why is there boulevard street trees between the Quick Trip on 55th Street and the roadway there at actually a higher density than what's being proposed by the street tree ordinance?
I'm not sure that there are.
In terms of, we had a major landscaping project that was done with the Highway 52 project where we actually, a number of places, including some very high-profile retail areas, we put pretty extensive landscaping and street trees in. I'm thinking particularly in that Best Buy and Target North area. Could you speak to, did we ever get any comments from those retailers that were opposed to the trees going in? Has anyone received any complaints along those lines?
On page 145, at the paragraph below that, John's memo points out that Marketplace, the Target development, planted boulevard trees along the frontage road at a spacing, I think he says, of 50 feet, without any requirement to do so.
Which that would include major retailers like Target, Home Depot, I think PetSmart was in there, a number of smaller restaurants that were all national chains that had no problem with it.
None that we heard.
Okay. Yes, Mr.
In
Freeze?
response to your question, there were some businesses that were very much opposed to the tree planting plan for Rock 52. And we met with each of those and worked out compromises. It involved primarily view triangles, if you will, toward pylon signs and store signs, but it ended up with more clustering than the linear approach to every so many feet. In the area of Best Buy, along the frontage road there, the exit ramp and the frontage road connecting 37th and 41st Street, for example, it is a linear planning plan, but it does not begin to approach the 35-foot spacing. It's significantly greater. So, yeah, there were,
Did we have any where we had to get rid of all the trees as being proposed here?
no, we did not get rid of all the trees at any location. It was, again, compromises on location, clustering, those sorts of things.
Could we put a condition on this thing that said, say if there's supposed to be 50 trees in the boulevard, I don't know how many there are supposed to be, but say 50 trees, and the determination of the location of those trees, which would have to be the entire 50 trees, would be determined upon the selling or the sale of the lots? I mean, I understand the need for the trees. I'm not against the trees, but I'm also concerned that we're going to let potentially a couple of high-profile businesses go away. And if that happens, I have no idea. And everybody knows I'm pro-development, so all of you people out there listening and in the paper, put that in there so the bloggers can hit me, that I'm pro-development and I like all that kind of stuff. But I really think that there's got to be some solution here tonight so he can at least get grading and get some plans for some people to start building property in this town.
Well, and actually, I'll support part of what you're saying there. You know, I appreciate the fact that I think there are some possible compromises in terms of how we can approach this. You know, that said, we have an ordinance that is in place that we must follow until that ordinance is changed. And I think that, and again, I'm going to keep hammering on this because the public deserves a right to weigh in on this, because we're not just talking about the 60% of Minnesotans that drive. We're talking about the 40% that don't drive too. They're my constituents. They're important to me, and I'm going to keep pushing for them to have a voice in this as well.
35 feet, every 35 feet is the worst situation we could possibly be in, because that, at any kind of an angle, that leaves 100% screening. Until this evening, my understanding, and I quite honestly didn't get a chance to read this till this week, until reading it here, I don't know that and I'm pretty good at listening, I don't know that I ever really heard of an option of not having one every 35 feet, with the exception of openings for streets and fire hydrants. So that would be definitely beneficial. I hadn't heard that to this point, but
Point out to the council and the applicant that on page 245, in our pre-development meeting, we talked about how the spacing could be done so as to avoid the concern that he's raising. So I don't know that that removing that condition resolves Mr. Zelo's concern, but if it does, that's fine with me, because the ordinance is in place, and the ordinance would require an average spacing with a mix of boulevard and understory trees and clustering allowed, and the avoidance of things like driveways, utilities, and all the other things provided for in number 244, or 1.
And I would go back to the practical standpoint of this too, is you can sell whatever you want to the potential people that are buying this, but at the end of the day, it's still public right of way, and there are no assurances that you can ever give those companies that are buying that box that there will never be trees there.
there's actually things that people feel strongly about, whether they're political or environmental or whatever. There's always a danger that a company like ours will have people say Quick Trip's a bad person here. But if anybody ends up being the whipping boy unintentionally, let's make it Northwest Investments all across, and not Quick Trip.
I do have a, you know, as I thought about this, what keeps coming up to me is the whole difference between the Walmarts that were built in Inver Grove Heights, the Walmart in Inver Grove Heights, and the ones that were built in Rochester. And if some of you remember those discussions, it was if we made them put a nice facade on the buildings, they just wouldn't want to do business in Rochester versus, the very beautiful building that they built in Inver Grove Heights. And we're a great community. People are here by choice. They're not here because we're the cheapest place to do business or we have low standards. I think it's okay for us to have high standards. I think it's okay for us to be demanding. I think it's good that we make good decisions and things that affect air pollution, stormwater, urban heat island effect, pedestrian friendliness, active living. These are all reasons why the street tree ordinance passed. There's some flexibility to work within this, but to take two major pedestrian routes in the city of Rochester and just say not a single tree for the entire length. I mean, I biked when we had our dinner meeting today. I biked 15 miles up and back to that meeting, and basically scorched by the sun and black asphalt the whole way. And it's just a miserable experience. We're not talking about little parts here and there that don't have it. It's the fact that the whole city's built that way right now, and it's a problem that we're trying to fix. And so I think that we're going to be able to come up with some areas, but the plan that was put before us, I just don't see any point in keeping it around. I tend to agree with Mr. Wheeler's recommendation that we just get rid of that and let them work from some baseline.
All right, any